Hi guys, I wanted to talk about an interesting book of the Old Testament today. It's the book of Esther. And the book of Esther is distinct because it's a book where God is totally, seemingly silent in the face of human suffering. God's people, the Israelites, had been kicked out of their country. It's called exile, and they were basically taken into Persia under the reign of King Xerxes. And so there's this whole story where they're in the context of God's punishment, they're facing severe trial, and God just doesn't talk. He's actually not mentioned at all in this biblical story, which is crazy. And so I wanted to give us a brief sort of overview, maybe some observations, but this is definitely something you guys got to read on your own. And I'd encourage you to read it in one sitting. It's only 10 chapters. It takes about 30 minutes for a slow reader like me to read it. It's awesome. It's like a drama. It's really a narrative, really easy to follow. You don't need a ton of background information. It's really, really cool. So there was this king named King Xerxes, and he had this guy, Haman, was his sort of right-hand man. And through a couple of different events, a Jewish lady named Esther becomes the queen. She marries the king, and she has a lot of favor with him. And so Haman, ironically, hates the Jews, and this whole time Esther was keeping her ethnicity secret. Esther had a uncle, cousin sort of figure that adopted her named Mordecai. Mordecai and Esther have this really awesome relationship. He's constantly looking out for her, but she's the one with all the power, which is really cool. Xerxes has a parade for his friend Haman, and shows him, just how cool he is in his eyes to everybody else. And when he passes by Mordecai doesn't bow down like everybody else to Haman. And Haman's so angry about this, he doesn't just want to kill Mordecai, he actually wants to kill his entire race off. He just wants to eradicate him. And so Haman talks about, the situation of the king, and the king's like, whatever, sure, you can keep your money. He was going to bribe him to get him to pass this thing to kill the Jews off, and the king's like, you know what, I like you enough, you can keep your money, and go ahead and sort of whimsically allows Mordecai to pass this law across the 127 provinces that he owns, that he can kill off the Jews. And so this thing gets passed, and Mordecai hears about it, and he's like, all right, gotta go talk to my lady Esther. This is Mordecai's answer to her, being like, hey, maybe you've been put here for a reason. Maybe God has a plan for you here. God is going to protect his people either way. The question is if you want to be a part of this plan or not. You won't come out of this unscathed unless you're faithful. There's this crazy order out that's like, hey, all Jews on a certain day of the year, people have every right to kill them. And Mordecai is proactive, but he's not worried. He knows that God's going to take care of it. He wants to have a role in that, and he wants his loved ones to have an opportunity to get to be a part of God's plan to deliver his people. But there's really no question in his mind that they're going to get out of it. Mordecai is basically in trouble, and he doesn't know it. Nobody knows it, but Haman builds a gallows or erects a pole to impale him on. One of those two things. There's sort of a discrepancy in the method of killing, but obviously this public display of death, and Haman's like, okay, tomorrow I'm gonna go kill him. So there's this really cool image of Mordecai and Haman having a stare down, and the guy that's has the ear of the king, the second most powerful guy in the land, and he's planning your genocide, the genocide of your people. And Mordecai continues to show this sense of peace of I don't know where deliverance is going to come from, but it's going to come. I have no reason to fear you, and I have no reason to submit to you. Before Esther reveals Haman's plan, Haman decides he's going to kill Mordecai. And this is an example of how God might not be speaking, but he's definitely at work. He's behind the scenes, orchestrating world events in his favor for his people. His presence is always there even when his words aren't. These people have taken captive the Jewish nation, but there's this fear of Jews, and it's because throughout the entire Old Testament, the people, the surrounding nations of Israel, have heard of the power of Yahweh, which is the name for the Lord. It's the personal name of God. And they've heard how he led them out of Egypt. They heard how they've seen armies falling before them, and like people are afraid of the power of God. Like they know that God has power, whether or not they worship him or not. They definitely respect and fear him. Esther ends up exposing Haman and gets the king on board with allowing the Jewish people to defend themselves. Israel is only acting in self-defense, but there's definitely casualties, right? And so as we're facing a time where our world is suffering, it's really important to realize, like, even though God's voice isn't necessarily heard, that he's still orchestrating hope. He's still orchestrating world events to see his purpose fulfilled, and that ultimately his character, he's a good God. He does good things despite pain, and he can do good things through pain and suffering. It's so important to remember that, and where we don't need to be cavalier about what this world is going through, it's also important to remember Mordecai and that image of him reclining in the face of danger, and this confidence of, like, how are we going to get out of this? Because I know we're going to get out of this. This is sort of his attitude this whole time, because God is good and he takes care of people. We need to be challenging ourselves to say, what is the right response? How can I be proactive? How can I take care of people? How can I do my part? But how can I still trust in a good, loving God and enjoy his creation, which is ultimately good despite the broken parts of it?